So with no further ado, my name is Matthew Griffin. A lot of people call me a futurist. I look at the future and deep future. Now, the reason why I make the distinction is most multinationals and organizations are typically interested in what's going to happen in typically the next 5 to 10 years. Some multinationals extend that out to, say, 20 years. But if you're a sovereign or national government, typically your point of view starts anywhere from tomorrow and extends all the way out to about 50 years. So if you think about the future of energy, jobs and skills, infrastructure, all that kind of stuff, we sort of talk typically more in terms of long term. So I also head up the World Futures Forum at Exponential University, and at the moment we push out a whole variety of different free courses, basically for students all the way around the world. We have about 45,000 students going through a variety of our different free programs to try to help people understand what the future is going to look like and how to lead it. And increasingly, as you'll sort of see through this presentation, the future is increasingly complex. So I work with a whole variety of different organizations across sectors, big and small, and the one thing that all of these different organizations have in common is every single sector that they operate in, without exception, is being disrupted. And we're going to go through some of those today. So when we start having a look at the future, I write a regular blog, but I also have a series called the Codex of the Future series. So for everyone who's watching this at the moment, if you go to the website, which is www.311institute.com/explore, you can download this Codex of the Future. The reason why this is important is because there is far too much for me to cover in this presentation. And what you'll find is this particular codex details over 250 exponential technologies in details. This one is creative machines. We're going to be going through this one later. This is game-changing, this particular one, but you can browse this at your leisure. So feel free to go and poke around the website, and there's lots and lots of information all over the place. And it's all free and happy to share. So as a futurist, if I went back to the 1980s or I went back to the year 2010, I think I'd actually have a problem that I like to call the time traveler's dilemma. So here we are in 2020. I have perfect knowledge of the year 2020 because I'm living in it. If I went back to the 1980s and I sat down with world leaders, heads of schools, whoever it happened to be, and I said, in the year 2000, 2005, we will have this thing called the internet. And this thing called the internet will be connecting 3.5 billion people on the planet. It will have transformed global society as we know it and upturned everything. I'd be laughed at. Secondly, if I went back to 2010 and I managed to sit down with all the CEOs of all of the automotive organizations anywhere on the planet, and I said to them, I think that in 7 years' time, a little bit less, but 7 years' time, you'll be spending hundreds of billions of dollars building cars that drive themselves, that you no longer sell to consumers because you sell them as a service, and you'll spend further hundreds of billions of dollars electrifying your fleets, then I'd have been shown the futurist's equivalent of this, the door. And it's very similar today. Now, as a futurist, increasingly, I'm invited in more and more places because we see disruption as this omnipresent stalking horse nowadays.
Today, we're all being disrupted, and I'm not just talking about being disrupted by digital humans like me.
So that's Brian. He's a digital human. He doesn't exist. He cost me around 5 cents to put together. Thanks, Brian. But as Brian said, we are all being disrupted. At the start of the year, I was presenting on these kinds of stages. The biggest screen I've ever presented on basically was an IMAX at the London Science Museum. It's 5 stories tall, 60 to 70 foot tall. Other stages anywhere between 100 feet wide. And yet nowadays, thanks to coronavirus, I'm now presenting on this, an iPad, or your laptop, or your smartphone, or whatever it happens to be. The biggest screen that I am presenting on this year is 17 inches. And that means that I've been having to innovate and disrupt myself, because this status quo we either adapt or we fade away. But if you think about the technology that's now helping me drive my virtual studio into your homes, in your living rooms, I'm driving 4K. 10 years ago, 4K would have been very, very expensive. Ultra high definition sound, hopefully that's what you're hearing. I'm running this off a single computer. 10 years ago, computers wouldn't have been able to run all of the different programs and inputs and feeds that I need to run. So I wouldn't have been able to do this 10 years ago. That's how far we've come in just 10 years. So we now live in this world where we exhibit and experience disruption as usual. We talk about business as usual. Business as usual is dead. It's disruption as usual that we now talk about. If you think about this, disruption today is faster than it has ever been at any point in human history. We've all seen these kinds of charts before. It used to take about 75 years for the telephone to hit 50 million users. We hit Pokemon Go hit 50 million users in about 2 weeks. Call of Duty hit 100 million users within 6 days. So if you think about this, if I'm an entrepreneur and I can create typically a digital product and I can hit the right levers, the right execution buffers, and all these other kind of things, I'm rapidly getting to the point where I can disrupt the world in a day. Because if I can get 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 million people to download or use my service, I've disrupted a global industry at scale. We've also had the perfect example of a company who is capable and able and could have disrupted the world in a day. It's Facebook's Libra. So Libra is a cryptocurrency. When it was released, had the global government actually approved it, it would have been used by, what, 500 million people in the first day? Even the state governments, the US, the UK, Germany, and even the People's Bank of China said that Libra presented such a significant threat, it could have changed global money. So it could have changed the financial services overnight, and it could have meant that most governments lost control, basically, of state-sponsored cash in a whole variety of different ways. We live in a world where you are now able to disrupt, as an individual, the world at scale and at a speed that is unprecedented. But when we start talking about the future, again, it's more complex, it's more dynamic. Part of the reason for that is if you think about all the different products and services that you're using now, like the ones that I'm streaming through to you, everything is a combination of technologies. So I track over 450 exponential technologies. There are 180 technologies on this starburst. This is the 2021. 2021's is coming out next year. Every single technology on this starburst, and it's organized into categories like advanced manufacturing, communications, energy, because you need to be able to combine these things together to disrupt the status quo. Every single dot is worth at least $500 billion. Every single technology has the potential to either disrupt one industry or all of them. So, for example, 3D manufacturing, increasingly that starts disrupting the $10 trillion manufacturing industry. Artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology. It disrupts everything. But if we have a look at just a couple of these different technologies, I'll talk about bioreactors in a little bit. That does something amazing. We have 3D printing, we have 4D printing coming through. We'll have a little bit of a chat about that as well. When we have a look at biotech, there are some very interesting gene editing technologies coming through in biotech, as well as nanomachines. We now have nanomachines that are able to perform in vivo human surgery, although the regulators won't let those nanomachines anywhere near a human, so it's had to be done in trials. When we start having a look at communications, we have 5G, we've got 6G coming through in 2030 with China already pushing satellites into space. We have high altitude platforms, we have satellite systems in low Earth orbit that are now trying to connect the other 3.5 billion people who don't have decent broadband to the internet via companies like Starlink, basically with SpaceX and Elon Musk. When we start having a look at things like computers, we all have already moved beyond quantum computers. Quantum computers will be commercialized in about 2025. They're 100 million times more powerful than anything that we have today. So they recently passed a particular milestone called quantum supremacy, which meant that Google's supercomputer, or Google's quantum computer, was more powerful than the Department of Energy's Summit and the HPC #1 slot Riken supercomputer that can perform crazy numbers of calculations basically every second. Over in China, basically, as well as Caltech, basically they've already managed to build the world's first biological computers. That's where we've turned bacteria into computing and storage devices, and we've retrieved information from bacteria. We have DNA computers coming through, so we have blueprints thanks to the University of Manchester and Ross King and his team. A DNA computer the size of a quarter of a test tube would have more computing power than every computer on the planet. So you start taking all of these individual technologies and combining them together, whether it's augmented reality, artificial intelligence, whether it's virtual reality. We can 3D print artificial intelligences. We've made AIs out of glass. We've made AIs out of DNA. The world that we are living in is increasingly science fiction already. So that's just the sort of the snowflake on the tip of the rapidly melting iceberg. And this is in the codex, by the way, hence me sort of mentioning the codex at the start. Now, when we start having a look at some of these different technologies, one of the fundamental laws of technologies is technology always ends up getting faster, cheaper. You get more bang for your buck, so you get more performance basically for your dollar. And they become increasingly ubiquitous. If you have a look at the storage in your systems, for example, since the first hard drives came out in 1956, which is 63 years ago-ish now, the cost of storing a gigabyte's worth of information has dropped by 15 billion fold with a B. Capacities have increased 4 million fold. Now, as we start expanding this into the future, and when we start thinking about what we can do with future or futuristic technologies, if you have a look at today's hard drives, we've got solid state drives, which fit 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes worth of data on, and they fit in the size of your fingernail. The original hard drives had to be carried around in a plane. But we have DNA storage coming through, courtesy of Twist Bioscience and Microsoft, as well as a whole bunch of others. When you have a look at DNA storage, we can already store 213 petabytes in 1 gram, and it works out at about $223 per gram. Now, consider this. If we fast forward that technology out 10, 20, 30, 40 years, if you dropped the cost of DNA storage by 14 billion fold, it's basically free. In fact, it became free a long time ago. When you start having a look at capacity increases, you times it by 4 million fold. It's insane. These are the technologies, these aren't science fiction technologies. These are technologies you can use today. Microsoft is putting DNA storage into the cloud. So when we have all of these different technologies, over time, they reduce the cost, effort, and speed per transaction, where a transaction can be anything. It could be an artificial intelligence brokering a price, turning on a light switch. It can be a high-frequency trade on a stock exchange. It can be energy generation, whatever the transaction is. Reduces it all to zero. Now, for example, we can already see a point in time where the cost of energy will get to zero. If you go onto Google, for example, type in cost of wind generation, you'll just see graphs that do this. If you have a think about the cost of lighting your studios now, if you move back 100, 200 years ago, you used to have to get a gas lamp and everything else. Now you flick on a switch. When we start talking about using technologies to reduce the amount of effort it takes to flick on a switch, I can now just talk to my lights and say, lights on, lights off. I'm reducing the amount of effort. When we start having a look at things like access to information, Google democratized access to information. Information access is essentially free now. You have all of the world's information in your pocket in one of these kind of devices. In addition to that, artificial intelligence is now starting to democratize access to expertise. And there's a whole variety of different ways that we can access and tap into that. So for example, you can use platforms like LawGeeks and your voice and say, put me together an NDA contract, and it'll go off and do it. You can create your own products using your voice. You can use low-code and no-code platforms to get platforms like Microsoft DeepCoder and Google Bayou to build applications for you. You don't need any specific skills in many things any longer. You can use NVIDIA GoGAN. You can do a really crappy sketch and it will turn it into a beautiful high resolution image for you. If you draw a crappy mountain, basically it'll create the sunsets, the skies, the reflections in the lakes, everything. It's very good. So the cost of creating content is falling as well. Everything falls over time. And what this means for you as an industry is that over time, exponential technologies will fundamentally undermine the economics of your industry and your entire industry value chain. In addition to that, when we look at disruption, there's new competition. When industries start digitizing themselves, the borders and boundaries between them all basically become eliminated. If you go and have a conversation with a retailer today and you say to a retailer, what industry are you in? They will say, we're in the retail industry. If you're going to have a conversation with a financial services organization like Wells Fargo and say, what industry are you in? They will say, we're in the financial services industry. You know, we provide loans, mortgages, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of old world thinking. Because if you go and have a conversation with a technology company, you know, Fatbag, you know, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent, Apple, Google, you know, Baidu, you know, Amazon, all these kinds of acronyms that we have for these guys. And you go to say Amazon or Facebook or Google and say, what industry are you in? They will look at you dead in the eye and they will say, all of them. As an industry, you need to get away from thinking that the industry that you are in is the industry that you are always going to be in. You can break out of your swim lanes thanks to the digitization of industries and things. In addition to that, when we start having a look at the future of business, we already have 15 companies, both in Asia and actually on the east coast of the US, that are now fully autonomous. They're run by artificial intelligences. We have AIs basically that are now hiring and firing managers, whether it's with companies like Uber or Amazon. The world is changing around us, and it's quite a handful to sort of get your head around it all. So how many of you believe in magic? I will pretend I can see you all and that you've all put your hands up, because obviously we all believe in magic. If I step back 100, 200 years ago and I show somebody the lamp above my head, they would think it's an artificial sun. They would think it's magic. We don't think that artificial light is magic any longer. It's just part of our status quo, which is a little bit of a shame, to be fair. But when we start talking about magic, magic is typically thought of as something that we can't explain. And these are science fiction technologies that we've had now for a couple of years in these cases. So on the left, we have brain streaming. We're using artificial intelligence and we're using blue skull caps to stream your thoughts and your images and the images that you're thinking about to YouTube. We can do this with movies and everything else. And if you're looking at the pictures thinking that they are low resolution, 3 years ago you couldn't do this. Another 3 years' time, these will be high resolution. Remember, exponential technologies advance very, very quickly. On the right-hand side, for any of those of you that are Blade Runner 2049 fans, this is a hologram. This is a real hologram. It doesn't use augmented reality. There is no funky glass basically between the camera and the user. These are created using femtolasers. These are the real deal. These are the Star Wars Leia holograms basically that we grew up with as kids. So, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Deflector shields, tractor beams. We have every single science fiction technology that you can think of. We have 6 and 8 base pair DNA alien organisms basically over in the US. You'll love that one. That's a whole different story for later. The things that we can do with technology is a rocket ship, are insane. we are way beyond what most people see in their everyday in a lot of the labs. Now, when we start applying a lot of these innovation technologies, I said that the pace of disruption is quick. I showed you how we can disrupt a global industry or the global status quo in just a day. But what about making products? What about reimagining innovation? Well, now we have artificial intelligence in terms of creative machines. They're anything from general adversarial networks to DNNs that are able to design and innovate their own products. But when we start combining these different technologies together, we can do some awesome things. So what about, for example, increasing the rate of hardware innovation by easily 10,000-fold? This is about 2 years old now. There have been more of these come out, but it's quite an interesting video. This is a sausage robot. The researchers out of the University of Oslo were tasked the robot getting from one side of the studio to the other side of the studio as quickly as possible. The arms of the robot have got sensors in. Those sensors feed information about the robot's movements and speed and all that kind of stuff back to this. It's the creative artificial intelligence that then redesigns the robot using virtual simulation. You can see it's trying to figure out the best angles, the best model for robot version number 2. So as this general adversarial network under that guy's desk comes up with robot version number 2, it sends that across to a 3D printer. So there's a 3D printer there. The lab technician takes all the different parts of the robot and assembles them together. If you switch out the 3D printer for a 4D printer, where 4D is time, you end up with a robot that self-designs and then self-manufactures, but then walks off the printer itself. As I've said, the reason why I show videos is because these technologies are already here. This technology is actually now being used by General Motors to help them shave weight off their cars, as well as lots of other organizations in it. So this is innovation at 10,000 speed. And increasingly it's accessible to anyone and everyone. However, we also have technologies today that allow us to increase our rates of innovation by 100 million-fold, if not more. We can do this by using artificial intelligence with virtual simulated environments. This is from OpenAI.
We're trying to build robots that learn a little bit like humans do, by trial and error. What we've done is train an algorithm to solve the Rubik's Cube one-handed with a robotic hand, which is actually pretty hard even for a human to do. We don't tell it how the hand needs to move the cube in order to get there. The particular friction that's on the fingers, how easy it is to turn the faces on the cube, what the gravity, what the weight of the cube is, all of these things, it needs to learn by itself. The interesting thing is that kind of standard techniques in robotics haven't been able to scale to that complexity that we see in a robotic hand. Humans have evolved to be able to manipulate and operate our hands. So there's a huge amount of learning that's happened through evolution to get us to this point as a species. And the robot has to learn all of this from scratch. Instead of trying to write very dedicated algorithms to operate such a hand, we took a different approach where we create thousands of different simulated environments and learn to do the task in all of those, and hopefully a robotic hand will be able to do it in the real world as well. This means like thousands of years of experience that this neural network has had in simulation. Every time the algorithm has gotten good at the task, we make the task harder. That's really crucial because it needs exposure to really complicated environments in order to eventually be robust to the real world.
So what they did there is OpenAI created the world's most dexterous robot hand, basically, that's able to solve a Rubik's Cube one-handed, but they crammed thousands of years worth of training and, in their words, experience into just a week. Amazon are using those same technologies to train their delivery drones and all these kinds of other things. And when we start having a look at other organizations that are using these artificial intelligence innovators, we have Airbus, who are using these technologies to help them design the A330neo, which is the successor to the A320. We have InSilico. So InSilico's artificial intelligence designed 30,000 drugs, some of which were blockbusters, in 21 days. That's unprecedented. We have NASA, basically, where NASA were able to use these GANs to eliminate 30% of the weight from their lunar rovers. They thought that that was impossible. JPL's scientists and researchers, even themselves, are only able to shave about 5% off. Then we have Under Armour, basically, who used these particular creative machines to design a sneaker called the Architect sneaker. It's $300. You might still be able to buy it. But on day one, the artificial intelligence created this new sneaker, which even Under Armour said was revolutionary because of its tree root design, because the artificial intelligence looked at humans, it looked outside for inspiration, and it thought, trees. Yeah, trees have got roots, humans are tall, sort of similar. Under Armour then 3D printed these sneakers, and the impact of these particular technologies mean this. Your time in going from concept to shelf, in Under Armour's case alone, it used to take them 18 months. It now takes them 2 days. And if they have a couple of coffee breaks, it takes them a week. So the rate that we can innovate and design new products and get them out to market is incredibly fast now. These machines are also starting to innovate content. We have virtual bloggers. We have them creating games. We have a couple of artificial intelligences writing books on batteries. Sony and Warner Brother Music basically have signed up artificial intelligent musicians, where the AIs themselves just create infinite amounts of music. And then in addition to that, basically we have them producing all kinds of other sort of synthetic video content and all kinds of things. And we're not just talking about deep fakes. There's lots of different technologies coming together to revolutionize how we create content. And just when you think about the content industry alone, the content industry is worth an estimated $5 trillion. It employs about 235 million people. When these machines get hold, what happens to them? So there's lots of societal questions as well. Now, moving into some of the industries now, when we have a look at agriculture, this picture is going to be an increasing rarity. What we have is we have a cow. I'll show you how we can eliminate the cow in a moment. We can eliminate the fields as well, particularly thanks to, say, vertical farms. Vertical farms are typically able to produce about 8 crops in a given year. It's like a manufacturing process. They're able to do it with up to 99% less water, no pesticides or chemicals and all that sort of stuff. Amazon and Walmart are increasingly putting vertical farms into their warehouses. So if you order anything off Amazon Fresh, particularly on the West Coast, they love California as a playground, you're going to be getting your lettuces and everything else from an Amazon warehouse, not from an actual field. Now, I know basically that your particular area, raspberries basically are absolutely key. So I'm using this particular one to illustrate a point. When we start combining different technologies together, like artificial intelligence, machine vision, increasingly sophisticated robotic systems and servos and actuators and so on and so forth, you end up with a robot that's able to pick a raspberry. Now, as any farmer can tell you, a raspberry is very, very delicate. Now, these particular harvesting robots, I know what you're doing, you're looking at it and you're thinking, this thing's slow. These will eventually replace human pickers. In a couple of years' time, about a year to 2 years' time, these robots should be able to pick 25,000 raspberries at a rate about 60% faster than humans. And if you doubt that, remember, technology always gets faster, cheaper, more ubiquitous. And just to illustrate the point, here is a strawberry picking robot that used to be that slow. In 2019, strawberry picking robot would take 7.5 seconds to pick a strawberry. In 2020, it's 1.2 seconds. Now, as any strawberry farmer will be able to tell you, 1.2 seconds is important because that's how quickly a human picker can pick a strawberry. This next year, it'll be faster. You can scale these technologies up in a whole variety of different ways. So when you look at the raspberry picking robot and think it will never replace human pickers because it is too slow, too clumsy, remember the algorithm. And then, while we're here, we might as well solve global famine. So what if I could take one cell from one animal, any animal? It could be a panda, it could be a zebra, it could be a cow, it could be a chicken, it could be a duck, it could be absolutely anything. And I can just make an infinite amount of that. And I can create what we call lab-produced meat. So meet Ian the chicken. Ian the chicken is one of the luckiest chickens alive, because he's alive, in spite of what happens.
We've all been there, right? In the grocery store. Oh, I'll just buy this meat. And there it is. And all we have to do is buy it. We don't have to think about what it took to make that chicken in that nice packaging. But the reality of the way that it came about, it's incredibly unsustainable. And that's one of the biggest problems facing humanity right now. But we figured out a way to solve it. The whole idea is that that chicken in itself has an unlimited source of itself, and there is a way where you can take just a handful of cells and keep growing them essentially infinitely. For those very first cells, it was important to us how we got the cells, not just that we got the cells. We came up with the idea to use one feather from the single best chicken that we could find.
We picked out.
The first thing we need to do is we need to identify a cell that we are going to use as the basic starter material. And then what we need to do is find a food for it to grow in. So we have to identify the right set of nutrients that will cause the cells to multiply, but not just multiply, but do so quickly and into high densities.
Wake up, I wanna lift you up, I wanna dress you up, let's be friends.
It was an out-of-body experience to sit there and eat a chicken, but have the chicken that you're eating running around in front of you. You don't imagine doing something like that.
So when we talk about exponential disruption, crazy ideas are now being made possible thanks to new technologies and innovations. And as for the cost of an Ian the chicken nugget, if you went back 6 years ago, a quarter of a pound of beef would have cost, made in that way, would have cost you $250,000. About 2 years ago, it was $363. In about another 5 years, 4 years, we'll start seeing meat produced in that way competing with meat in the supermarket at $5 per pound. And then from a regulator's perspective, literally yesterday, Ian the chicken and lab-produced meat was just completely approved by the Singapore government, basically for consumption in Singapore. China have bought $230 million. The US FDA have actually approved Walmart basically to sell lab-produced meat. And the benefit of lab-produced meat is you don't need huge swathes of land. You don't need to destroy the rainforests any longer. You can put a bioreactor, in that case, and a vertical farm in the middle of a desert near Timbuktu, and you can be feeding people panda burgers, you can be feeding people steak, literally steak, as well as chicken nuggets and fresh vegetables on tap, on demand, day in, day out. Now, I'm going to give the fruit growers, basically, of your area a particular conundrum, because when we've sort of been talking about the development of lab-produced meat, or clean meat as it's also known, it's now starting to get to a point where beef farmers are now starting to take notice and saying, this isn't real meat. And people are going, well, it is real meat because it was grown from cells from a cow, for example. And the beef burgers that we're producing in this way, as well as the fish that we're producing in this way, are actually natural, and they're from fish. So farmers, livestock farmers particularly, are now trying to get all these different meats certified as grown in a lab, as opposed to produced in a field. Agriculture's, the farming community, when it comes to fruit, is going to face the same dilemma as well. These fruits here were created by an art and design student out of Italy. They are 3D printed fruits. Now, I could call them a fruit, but if all of a sudden somebody starts, I call this a strawberry in the top left-hand corner, and I go to market with that, and my strawberries basically are actually better than your strawberries, you start taking me to court, you tell me I can't call these things a strawberry, you also start telling me that I can't call these things fruit, we end up in a legal battle. That's exactly where the agricultural industry is going on a whole variety of different fronts, from meat to fruits in this particular case. But if your industry looks at these and you look at these as a threat, you're missing the point. These are also an opportunity. You can reinvent fruit. You can you can make fruits in different ways. You can give them different textures. You can give them different flavors, and you can still sell your regular fruit as well. This is a massive market that's already starting to emerge. And again, when we start thinking about food traceability, we have edible electronics coming through. So as you can see, this is a strawberry. If you can see the faint lines on it, that is a piece of edible electronics. You can start tracking everything about that strawberry, from its ripeness all the way through to its location. We can 3D print transistors, computing components into it. We can print sensors and all kinds of different things into it. You can track that strawberry literally from farm to stomach, not farm to fork or farm to plate any longer, farm to stomach. And edible electronics have a huge number of uses just outside of this, on smart pills and all kinds of different things. Now, when we have a look at the communications sector, we've got low Earth orbit satellites going up. SpaceX and Elon Musk are putting about 12,000 into low Earth orbit. Those satellites are already delivering internet speeds of about 70 megasecond, basically down to the West Coast as well as other parts of the US, for around 60 to 70 bucks a month. That starts disrupting the global carriers. So, for example, Vodafone in the UK, T-Mobile in the US, Verizon, AT&T. This is disruptive to them. In addition to that, though, when we start looking at what we can start doing with 5G, again, from your local area, what about remote surgeries? What about having people within your community who are able to operate on people anywhere in the world? This is the first. China, this is a remote surgery over 5G, where the surgeon is 100 miles away, 30 miles-ish away, from the person that is operating. You are decentralizing surgery.
其实5G呢，就是让我们可以做到在很多场合，比如说救灾的场合，还有一些像边防上，还有一些呢，就是说像我们将来的基层和大型医院的连接，我们完全可以做到，就是让外科医生做的一个标准化的术式，一个人可以去做几千公里， 或者是那个几百公里，各种各样的这样点对点的一些连接。
The US military is also developing these types of technologies along with autonomous robots as well. And we have some more surprises coming up in a bit. However, when we start thinking about COVID, we've had to move our workforces back home. We've continually talked about working from home. It's not working from home, it's working from anywhere. Now I can use 5G to decentralize and help construction workers work from home while they are building buildings in other countries on other continents. The world of work is changing, let alone everything else.
Moving on to other stories now, South Korea is aiming to become one of the leading players of the 5G industry. We already have a head start in employing smart manufacturing solutions using the technology to remotely control machinery on other continents. Oh Seung brings us part 1 of our special series.
A 40-ton excavator at a construction site in Germany can be controlled from over 8,500 kilometers away in the South Korean city of Incheon. Earlier this month, Korean construction giant Tusan became the first firm in the world to remotely control machines on the other side of the planet. Running on-site operations through live video streaming, 3D machine guidance and real-time diagnostics doesn't just save time and money, but also enables remote handling in dangerous situations, such as the disposal of toxic materials.
A human worker can step in when necessary, remotely and efficiently handle multiple machines at once.
Smart factory solutions are one of the main sectors of application for the 5G wireless network, with data speed reaching 20 times faster than LTE and near zero lag time of 1 millisecond. It's expected to breathe life into the manufacturing sector, which makes up 1/3 of Korea's GDP.
So if you're a global infrastructure firm like Arup, like Colas, especially who employ hundreds of thousands of people, you can now start clearing runways, basically in Africa, based out of Surrey in the UK. It fundamentally changes the type of people you hire, where you hire them, and how you deploy your operational capabilities. And that's just the start of that. Now, when we start having a look at the energy sector as well, the energy sector basically is being turned on its head, principally thanks to renewable energy and the electrification of everything. Over in the UK, in 2025, all new homes that are built in the UK will no longer be allowed to go on the gas grid. We have the electrification of transport and all kinds of things. Over in California, they decided not to go ahead with 3 coal-fired power stations because instead they started aggregating together lots of different solar power capacity to create one of the world's first virtual power plants. A virtual power plant is just where you aggregate all of the different solar panels on people's roofs together using something like blockchain technology. You no longer need a massive power plant. The economics of electricity generation fundamentally changed to the point now where renewables basically are the cheapest source of electricity generation on Earth by far. Now, when we have a look at the different types of energy innovations that are coming through, it's an incredibly innovation-rich sector. So I'll just go through some of these ones quickly because, again, time. So today we have a lot of fossil fuels, but tomorrow basically increasingly we're moving to lithium-ion batteries. If you 3D print a lithium-ion battery, you increase its battery density or its energy density by 400%. If you include graphene basically in that lithium-ion battery, you can increase its charge rate by 500%. If we start using wireless charging, so for example over in New Zealand they now have wireless energy transmission over mountain ranges. That means you can eliminate all of the overhead pylons, all of the underground cables, basically when we start talking about energy infrastructure. When we start having a look at solar, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a moment. We also have things like structural batteries. Structural batteries make the lithium-ion batteries in your car, in your Tesla, if you have one of those, completely redundant because it turns the shell of the car into the battery itself. That's thanks to a technology called carbon nanotubes. We have biohybrid photovoltaics coming through. I'll explain those in a moment. And there is so much innovation going on in the energy sector that oil and gas organizations who should have seen things coming about 10 years ago are now in a scurry to catch up. We've now reached 1 trillion watts of installed renewable energy capacity in the world. There's 6 trillion watts in total. So still a way to go, but we've broken some major milestones. Now, if you consider this, if you sort of fast forward yourself 20 years and you sat down with your grandchildren and said, you know, in our day, you know, we used to spend hundreds of billions of dollars building these big things called oil rigs. And what we would do, those oil rigs would dig up and extract crude oil basically from deep under the oceans, and then we would burn that to produce electricity. But we'd burn that in a massive gas power station or oil-fired power station or whatever it happens to be, coal if you sort of go there. And so in order to power my house, in order to turn my lights on, I'm reliant on someone building a massive power station. Nowadays, I can stick a solar panel on the roof. I can disconnect myself from the grid. And I can do a whole variety of other things as well. I can sell my energy to whoever I want. But when we start having a look at manufacturing, you know, what about 3D printing a house in the future with its own nuclear reactor? Let's go a little bit crazy. So these have been built. This is a 3D community in Mexico that was 3D printed in 24 hours by a company called Houston. Now, to put 3D printed houses into perspective, today, if you want to use traditional building methods to build a a 4-bedroom house, for example, in Europe, it will cost you about £200,000 or euros. It will take you about 3 to 4 months to build. We are 3D printing houses in Europe, and we're 3D printing them in 8 hours, and we are 3D printing them for about 20,000 euros. These things are game changers. So remember, the cost of these technologies plummets. This is now a manufacturing problem. I did say, though, that I wanted to 3D print a house with a nuclear reactor. So courtesy of the US Department of Energy, when we can 3D print nuclear reactors, and the US Department of Energy 3D printed a nuclear reactor complete with its own working nuclear core, just to go crazy, you fundamentally change the economics and how quickly nuclear reactors can be regulated. So that's just a little bit of fun there, because in the future you're not going to 3D print yourself a nuclear reactor. You're going to 3D print your house complete with all its electronics and plumbing and pipe work and its solar panels straight onto the roof. Because we can already see that emerging as well. So, and this thing sort of keeps going. Now, when we start thinking about solar, today, if you go down to Home Depot and you buy a solar panel, it's a silicon solar panel, it's about 17% efficient. The world's most efficient silicon solar panels are typically about 21% efficient out of Japan. If you use Perscovite solar panels, we can get them up to an efficiency of 32%. Fossil fuels are dead by this point. If you start coating that Perscovite solar panel with a layer of graphene, it can generate electricity in snow. It can generate electricity at night. So you have a lunar solar panel, which is a bit ironic. It can generate electricity in rain, because when the rainwater runs over the surface of the panel, the graphene produces a charge. Now, if you start using genetically engineered bacteria in a solar panel, and we've done this, you can get to a solar panel that is 48% efficient. Bearing in mind, oil and gas as a power generation technology basically is long dead by this point. But what's special about this here is this is called black silicon. With black silicon, we've been able to actively demonstrate in the lab at the moment, that you can create a solar panel that is 132% efficient. Now, when they start getting commercialized, they won't be 132% efficient, but they could still be 80 to 90% efficient because we can reclaim heat and do all sorts of interesting and funky stuff. But at this rate, these panels, we've seen a whole variety of different records already broken, some from the US, some from China, some from Europe. It's not going to be very long before this is the status quo. And as I say, you can generate electricity from a solar panel when it's covered in snow, when it's nighttime. There's all sorts of funky things. As we start having a little bit of a deeper look into the future, in 2025, the Chinese want to produce a 6 gigawatt solar power station in space. NASA has actually started revising its own plans, same with the UK. So just as a little bit of fun, we can start in the future, we will be able to generate electricity in space, beam it down to Earth, either using laser or microwave satellite relay stations, and then that can be distributed all the way around the world. So the future of energy basically is very exciting. We have the electrification of cars, of aircraft, and all these kinds of things. We have hydrogen starting to come through as well, which is 10 times more energy dense than today's lithium-ion batteries. It's a very active space. Now, when we start having a look at healthcare as well, I talked about reducing the cost of healthcare. Now, I know that's a little bit of an irony basically over in the US. Sorry about that. We have the NHS in the UK, and if I break a hip, I go and I complain about the $5 worth of parking. However, this thing in your pocket isn't a smartphone. It's a tricorder. And that's a good thing for you now. So think about COVID and the impact that telehealth basically is already starting to have on how your doctors and consultants actually communicate with you, serve you, and all these kinds of things. If I take the camera in my phone, combine it with artificial intelligence, and combine it with sensors and the microphone, I can do the following. I can put this on my chest, and very quickly, without knocking my microphone, I can use the accelerometer in my phone to tell whether or not I have the onset of early stage heart disease. I can use the camera in my phone to tell whether or not I have skin cancer. I can use the camera in my phone. I can look like I'm taking a selfie. Hello. And I can detect pancreatic cancer, because when you get pancreatic cancer, your eyes go slightly yellowy. I can use the microphone as well. So by talking into the microphone, the system, artificial intelligence, can start diagnosing you for the onset of PTSD, Alzheimer's, dementia, colds and sniffles. When you get a cold, your voice changes. Even COVID. So one of the Californian universities, and you can search this on Google, actually started developing an algorithm that allows you to talk to their website, and it will tell you whether or not you have coronavirus, because coronavirus actually changes how you talk and the pitch in your voice a little bit, and all sorts of things. So think of these as a tricorder. I bundle all of that stuff into an app. I sell it for free if I'm Samsung or Apple or whatever it happens to be, and all of a sudden I've disrupted some primary and some secondary healthcare services for good. That's exactly what sort of Amazon would kind of do. You know, if you look at these problems, most of these are data problems, most of these are technology problems. You know, this is sort of where disruption starts creeping in and starts biting the incumbents, especially on the parts that they don't want to be bitten. Now, we also have 3D printed organs. So, for example, we're already 3D printing bones and different muscle tissues. So, for example, if you have cancer, we can 3D print a bone, and we can put that into your arm or wherever you have cancer, into your face, and it's using your own stem cells. We can 3D print mini human hearts, we can 3D print parts of human brains, we can 3D print kidneys and livers and everything else. This is a technology that's increasingly advancing at a rapid rate. It'll still be 10 to 20 years before you go into a hospital and they'll just sort of print you off a heart or a spleen or something like that. But we are actually starting to make some very good progress with bioprinting. In addition to that, I've talked about this one. This is where we simply use your smartphone as a tricorder device to give you access to primary and secondary healthcare, either for very low cost or for free. We have in vivo gene editing thanks to technologies like CRISPR. So again, over in the US, last year, we had a patient called patient X. He had Hunter's syndrome. Now, the news that you have about Hunter's syndrome has got good news, it has bad news. The good news with Hunter's syndrome is that you will die in 20 years. The bad news with Hunter's syndrome is that you will die in 20 years in a very, very painful way. So what we did is we used CRISPR and a variety of different gene editing tools to in vivo gene edit this patient's genome. He no longer has Hunter's syndrome. You can apply that same type of technology to over 6,000 inherited genetic diseases. In addition to that, thanks to breakthroughs in messenger RNA, we're now starting to get to the point where you can cure cystic fibrosis simply with a nebulizer via an aerosol, because you can put these gene editing tools into aerosol form. So science fiction has got nothing on this. You don't see that in the movies. And we are way beyond sci-fi. We also have increasingly autonomous robo-surgeons coming through over in China. And if you love your teeth, you'll love this one. We actually had a robot basically that autonomously implanted 2 teeth into a woman's jaw. Now, she did know about it, and the surgeons at the end, or the dentists at the end, said that it did a better job than they did. We also have the Da Vinci robots and a couple of other sort of robots that are starting to come through who are able to perform very basic surgery. There's also a neurosurgeon robot that is in the labs at the moment that can operate 50 times faster than the world's best neurosurgeon. So when we start having a look at healthcare, whether it's remote surgeries, let alone anything else, and I haven't even talked about nanobots and nanomachines and all regenerative medicine where you can grow a limb back and things. Basically, it's just crazy. And then finally, when we start having a look at space, increasingly over the past 10 years, the cost of accessing space has fallen dramatically. You know, if you think about Elon Musk's SpaceX with his Falcon 9s, he's dropped the cost of launching things and equipment into space about 100-fold. The ULA are obviously now starting to sort of catch up and try to figure out how they actually compete against this new disruptor. And again, most disruptors actually come from outside of an existing industry, because it's not in the industries, it's not in the incumbent industries to disrupt themselves, because they like the status quo. They like being number one, top dog. But as we start reducing the cost of accessing space and launching things into space, we've got moon bases that are now planned to be built. So Jeff Bezos wants to build a moon base. It seems to be the billionaire's play toy at the moment. In 2024, he said he's going to do that with ESA, with NASA, or without them. That's it. He doesn't mind. If they want to play with him, then they can. If they don't want to play ball, basically, then he wants to build his own moon base. And when you have a look at Blue Origin, they're already planning the first cargo flights, basically to land a ton's worth of equipment basically on the moon. And then again, just like the 3D printed houses, you can 3D print yourself a moon base or a Martian base. Elon Musk obviously wants to get to Mars. As he said, he wants to die on Mars, but just not on impact. I think I probably agree with him there. Increasingly, people like Jeff Bezos are talking about moving heavy industry off Earth and putting 1 million people either into some form of Martian colony or space colony. In addition to that, basically, if you don't really want to be part of the Jeff Bezos colony, maybe you just want to go to the International Space Station or a couple of the other orbiting space hotels that we're starting to see come through. So NASA has now approved the ISS basically to be turned into a hotel if you have the money, bearing in mind that the cost of launching people and equipment into space is starting to drop dramatically. We're also starting to mess about with and play around with 3D printing either rockets or entire rockets and or satellites and nanosatellites either on Earth and or in low Earth orbit. This is Space Tango. Space Tango are starting to launch 3D printing autonomous factories basically in space. NASA has announced plans to start assembling and 3D printing different satellites and different rockets and componentry basically in low Earth orbit as well. So increasingly space basically will be full of not just satellites and space junk, it'll also be full of some form of huge giant factories. And then bearing in mind that, you know, where you are at the moment, you are sitting on the West Coast. If you wanted to get to the other side of the planet as quickly as possible, bearing in mind that what I'll show you next, they want to sell tickets to this thing for the price of a traditional intercontinental aircraft journey. Elon Musk has now already started hiring engineers to build out these sea-based ports, and you'll see this as either the Falcon Heavy combined with a couple of Falcon 9 bits and bobs of technology, and he says he's on track to deliver this in 2024. So earlier we sort of talked a little bit about regional airports. What if you ended up using one of those systems to bring in business people basically from Japan, from Australia? They came into the local neighborhood, and then you started using a Hyperloop, which is a form of Mach 1 train in a tube, to ferry them up to Los Angeles basically within the space of about 30 minutes. Transportation is changing, healthcare is changing, retail is changing, energy is changing, communications and manufacturing are changing, everything is changing. And increasingly, it's a very, very complex and dynamic type of disruption that we face. So hopefully I've simplified it a little bit for you. I hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you very much.